And so one of the ways to accomplish this is to use a enterprise service bus or a service-oriented architecture. Some of the advantages of that system is that you are able to provide API level security. So you can control the security in a different way than the individual underlying applications could, either to restrict or to enable more functionality. It allows you to integrate disparate data into one API, and also allows you to translate multiple data interchange formats. So if you have one system and its output is XML, and a different system it would output in something like JSON, or you're receiving messages EDI or HL7 or some of those other data interchange formats, you basically have a translation layer that allows the applications to all talk to each other in languages that they know and understand, and ultimately you're able to push that information out to the mobile device or web browser. So just real quick, kind of as an example, the picture that I put together here. So a company has a warranty database, and its output is in XML. There is a user database that actually ties users back to like a customer number, and that's in the CSV. And then there's a product database that actually lists like part numbers as well as complementary or supplementary parts for that warranty piece. And these three systems don't talk to each other. Of course, don't share a common API. So the service bus layer actually knows what APIs to call for each of the individual tools, and then collects that information, assembles it into a new API, and then we'll transmit that back to the mobile device. Once those APIs are complete, then they can be sort of mixed and matched in any number of combinations to provide the right data to any applications you decided to build from that. Moving on, when you think about it, mobility is not really mobile apps. Mobility is mobile people interacting with your data, and that requires the ability to provide service anywhere, anytime. And so change in workflow because of the number of interruptions that can go on while a user is accessing your app, such as a phone call or SMS or you know, an email coming in. All of the interactions need to be quick and atomic. And by atomic there, I mean that you know, when I press a button, I count that all of the processes that button would have accomplished are completed before I'm interrupted. I don't need to have to go try to figure out, okay, where was I in the process when I do come back to the application. Another set of aspects to consider when supporting mobility, it's 24/7 availability and the support as companies adopt more flexible work arrangements. You know, or employees who you know, work in the evenings or early mornings, you know, will extend your support hours. And you may want to increase your language support and certainly engineer any applications for localization from the beginning. I wanted to point this one out. Just when you're going through the localization discussion, some languages such as German or Russian can have very long words that aren't easily broken up. So here's a word I won't try to pronounce too much of it, but it's a whole lot of letters, and in English would translate into Mass Communication Services Company. Trying to fit that into the layout on a small mobile device certainly requires some particular consideration. So working in English is certainly fine, but like I said, German is kind of an interesting one. Additionally, like Hebrew and Arabic are Instead of left to right, they are right to left languages, and so that's something else that needs to be considered as part of that localization process. Additionally, I mentioned, start with localization from the very beginning. It's much easier to add a new language for an application that's already been engineered uh, for localization than it would be to go retrofit localization into an existing application. When you think about mobility, it's really specific purpose computing. Any applications that you build should be developed with a specific use in mind. Adding additional functionality doesn't always equate to having more productive users or more time with eyes on the screen of your application. In a lot of cases, it can just be a waste of engineering time and your engineering investment. For example, several years ago, there was an iPhone app for a major airline that also included a Sudoku puzzle and I think a crossword. And they put additional resources into developing that functionality for their app. However, their app was really geared towards, what time is my flight and presenting boarding passes. And so in the user's mind, they're not thinking, oh, I want to play Sudoku. I'm going to go start the airline app. They're probably going to go start the Sudoku app if they care for that game that much. Trying to make an app into a Swiss Army knife of tools leads to cluttered workflows, potentially cluttered user interfaces, and those will drive users away from using your application. Some other things to be considered when looking at integrating mobility into part of your corporate presence is that on the devices themselves, the app data, your data is generally isolated from other applications also running on the same device. And while that's very secure, it does lower the ability to integrate multiple apps locally on the device. Usability is of the utmost importance. Being able to quickly accomplish whatever task the user needs to do with the appropriate number of clicks and easily reach settings is a huge consideration. I mentioned this earlier, but it's important enough to bring it back again, that any of the workflows that are going into your applications, they must be interruptible and be tolerant of fragmentation, meaning I might start the process at 1 o'clock in the afternoon in my office, but I might end up finishing it at 4 o'clock in the afternoon while I'm waiting in line to pick up my kids from school. And so just the change needs to be considered for any workflows that are going to be moved into mobile applications. Mobility is also really a shift for IT policy and governance. I'm not sure that it was completely well received. The bring your own device movement really changed this landscape for IT policy. For example, IT policy should not restrict users more tightly on their corporate PC than on their mobile device. For example, some of the software as a service offerings such as Evernote or Dropbox, which are extremely useful tools for a user to be able to collect data, on their mobile device or whatever. If a company is blocking access to those sites out of fear of being, like network storage or worried about their information leaking out, then they really are kind of getting out of the direct path of the data. So IT policy should reflect the needs of the users to get data onto and off of their mobile device. This can, the reason being is that this is challenging given some of the mobile device architecture. My recommendation in that space is if you have a lot of users who are trying to use something like Dropbox or Google Drive or those tools, and your policies restrict your data from being placed into the sort of cloud-based networking pieces, then your company should strongly consider a private hosting service like this, so that users can get data onto and off of their mobile devices instead. Okay. Um, so mobility is bring your own device. So it means supporting a heterogeneous environment. Um, Mobile devices, there's, at any given moment, there's, 3 or 4 different variations of Android, probably 2 or 3 versions of iOS. There's still Blackberries, Windows Mobile, feature phones, tablets of all different sizes, right? It's really changed a lot in that space as far as the number of and variety of devices that are available. Like I use Google Glass, and I love using that device, but it is another new device that um, to be considered as part of your mobility strategy. So my recommendation is that you have a tiered approach. Tier 1, corporate provided devices. So if your company provides phones or mobile devices to your customers, that's the area, of course, with your greatest level of support. It may be that your choice of mobile device could be influenced based upon the services or data that you want your mobile workforce to have access to. Tier 2 would be best-in-class applications for the most popular platforms. That really kind of reads into Android and iOS. Making sure that you support both of those um, platforms, and then provide a web interface or um, you know other means for less common or unsupported devices. This ties back into the conversation earlier around the reusable APIs. So being able to put a very simple mobile website on top of existing APIs is a relatively simple task. It allows the users to be able to accomplish the tasks that they need to get to, and shouldn't be a huge burden for the engineering piece. Finally, mobility is passionate. You can, seems like almost start a religious war with some crowds if you try to tell a dedicated iPhone user that Android is better. Um, Someone may leave with a black eye. Um, and so because of that, it's a good idea to maintain an appropriate level of feature parity across the applications that would sort of fit into the tier 1 or tier 2 categories I mentioned on the last slide. By feature parity, I'll give an example. I've long been a big fan of Evernote for collecting data and allowing me to get stuff out of my head and record it digitally. They recently had a feature that launched on the iPhone platform approximately 3 months before the Android platform. And on their forums, the Android user base was pretty upset and vocal about that. So, if they had maintained their feature parity a little closer, I think that feature might have been better received. I'm not saying that it was poorly received, but I think they certainly wouldn't have had the ugly comments posted to their forums. Also, develop native applications that exhibit the workflow and style of the operating system. Apple has a human interface guide that very well defines the workflow and movement through their mobile applications. I've worked with companies that wanted to directly port that experience to Android and or BlackBerry, and Android works in a very different way. Like where you go for settings is completely different, and just the way that you move from screen to screen and back and forth is entirely different. And so my advice to those companies were we can still have the same general look and feel, but let's develop the applications in the right way. And so my last big point here is that mobility is now, for the number of information workers who are working remotely or non-traditional hours, your IT strategy has to accommodate for them. Because if they don't, or if your policies do not, then they will find ways to accomplish the work tasks that they need to get done, and you may not like how they do it. So being able to provide those services that your users need prevents them from going and creating a new path that you don't have any control over. And the technologies and platforms are more stable. Your investment in mobility is not as risky as it was a few years ago. Consolidation of devices and commoditization, I believe, has simplified the landscape considerably. Developing applications these days are, primarily Android or iOS, whereas a few years ago you would have also potentially considered BlackBerry, Symbian, and some of the other OSs. Windows Phone is an interesting consideration, especially if your business is primarily a Microsoft shop. It does fit in well in that environment, but it's certainly more consolidated than it was just a few years ago. There are a few other topics that I wanted to mention that aren't really part of the webinar today. As I was putting the slides together and working with Brian and the practice lead Fernando, here were some of the other things that we talked about, and these are things that I get questions about on a fairly regular basis. And I wanted to bring these up so that if you do have questions or something related to this, you can get back in touch with Brian or and then we can sit down and really talk them all the way through. And one of the questions I get a lot is, which platforms do I support? And I think there are some really good questions to ask around that, and you might be surprised at the end result. There you might end up wanting to support some platforms that you wouldn't have thought of going into it. There's some aspects to think about. Native versus HTML-based development. So real quick, it's like native is you're using Objective-C on an iOS device, and then you would do Java for Android. Whereas with an HTML-based one, you're building web pages and putting a wrapper around them for the phone. And there are reasons that you might consider both methods. Monetization strategies, if you have an app that's for consumers, how do you charge for it? Should you charge for it? Are there other opportunities to monetize those? Mobility support services, things like SMS, digital markers I kind of mentioned earlier, like QR codes, location-based services, Microsoft Tag, etc. And then that really sort of ties into what the future trends are, like with the iBeacon process, wearables in general, glass, and context-aware applications. I think in the short term that the context becomes the next killer piece related to mobile apps. So thank you very much. Hopefully the information was helpful. I'm ready for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Brian. A couple of questions have rolled in. There weren't really any that were directly related to the slides, but more conceptual, so you can kind of handle them now. The first question we got in, do you have any thoughts on the specific strategy when developing native versus mobile applications? Basically, is it more successful to create a version that you download or one that you set up through a web browser?
So Yeah, I'll start a little more basic, but I promise I'll get back to the answer. So native applications, I think, provide a better end user experience if the app you're creating requires or can take advantage of some of the specific features that a platform offers. For example, I had the opportunity to work on uh, an app for um, electronics retailer on Windows Phone 7. And Windows Phone 7 had a really interesting feature, the live tiles piece, which don't exist in iOS or Android. And had we done an HTML wrapped type application, we might not have been able to do the functionality that we did with the um, with the live tile. Um, so the flip side, if the content that would be displayed through the application is highly dynamic and doesn't require the sets of access to some of the special features of the operating system, then building a web-based application could also work um, as well. I think one of the other considerations there too is, are there any possibilities for offline usage of the application? Um, if it's web-based and all of a sudden I can't get to the web, then the application is not very effective for the user. No, that's a good question. When we got to the related questions, that's generally one of the first ones that pops up. That one in the web platform. So good question. Hopefully I gave you a good answer.
Great. The next question that we have, what are your recommendations for developing a cross-platform app? Specifically, do you start with one and branch out, or is it better to design both together or apart?
Okay, yeah. So good question. Generally, the it's a staffing and resources question in my mind, especially if you have a common set of APIs that all of the applications would be using. So it's really a three-pronged development process if you're going to do Android and iOS, if that's what the decision comes down to, because you have to make sure that all the API work is there and compatible as well. And by sort of abstracting the user interface on the mobile application really is only displaying the data that the API is delivering. Being able to do cross-platform is relatively simple, or it's a lot easier than if you don't have that connection. Um, and then where it becomes a budget and resource constraint, as long as the APIs are constant across all of the devices, being able to add an additional platform should be relatively simple. Um, where I don't like one of the areas that I would strongly recommend, cover as many platforms as makes viable for launch. Like if you're doing a customer-facing application or consumer-facing application, um, you don't want to alienate the one of the large groups um, of users, because especially in this day and age where um, you know your competitors are all very quick and very smart as well. Um, if you don't service let's say for example, you don't service the Android market, um, one of your competitors will figure out how to uh, do that and take advantage of it. So I didn't have a definitive yes or no there, but I wanted to throw out a couple of things that I would think about in going through that. Just to summarize, as long as the APIs are consistent for um, all of the applications, then the decision comes down to, you know, what are my resources for building out multiple um, platforms simultaneously. I hope that helped.
Okay, thanks, Brian. We have a couple more here. Do you have any examples of apps that have gone live and are successful, and why they are, or some tools that were mobilized and did not succeed? And do you have the reasons why?
Oh, I mean, I can think of, hmm, it's funny. I'm pausing because I'm opening my phone to go see what applications I would have installed that I didn't care for and just happened to kind of leave in place. Um,
Do you know if, like, in general, there are some practices to avoid, or things that make some apps more successful than others?
well, so again, it goes a lot of it goes back to usability. I think especially if you're a company and you're trying to decide what to put into an app, only staying in one application is, or putting one workflow in the application is appropriate. Um, oh, so transparency with your users, particularly if you have a consumer-facing app, as far as like the security and how the data is used and how it's protected, certainly plays a factor. Um, I remember at South by Southwest 3 years ago, there was a company that made this app that kind of also made it very easy to stalk people. And while it was very popular for about 2 days during the um, conference, I think their user base dropped off very quickly afterwards. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that was kind of a curveball to throw at you.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, that was a good question though. Yeah.
okay, so when managing tablet size applications and bringing them down to a small format, what's the best strategy from a usability standpoint? And does it influence the development of the application?
Yeah, so I think it does influence the application. Uh, for me, generally, and I kind of go from small to large because it's easier to add stuff. Um, Reducing uh, screen size, you really kind of have two options. You either have to make things smaller, or um, create more screens effectively, and they can become very tricky in trying to keep all of the usability sort of on one page. For example, if part of your application has a lot of text entry fields, and then the action button, the submit or enter or whatever, is at the bottom, it can be very tricky and kind of messy on a smaller screen. Although smaller screens now are um, have very very high resolution. My phone is a 1080p device, and so it's much higher than some of the phones I was able to get a couple of years ago. So my recommendation is that when you look at what would be on the screen, um, combining all of the elements that are functionally related to each other and try to simplify those down as much as you can, and then make sure that they're easily accessible. So you could side swipe to them or something of that nature, but keep them logically together and try to make the transition to that data quick and relatively unobtrusive for the end user. Great question. I'm not um, the strongest usability guy, but that's I have
That's fine.
gone through that thought process. Thank you.
Okay, so you mentioned monetizing strategies. Is that the new trend
Hmm.
and direction of mobility?
Oh, I don't know. So one of the uh, one of the trends within sort of the monetization piece that I have very mixed feelings about is the sort of freemium model where you get the application for free and then it's 99 cents for this and 99 cents for that, and in-app um, purchases. I see how some people could be more enticed by that, where I'm only buying the content uh, that I want. Um, So monetization is a very interesting um, discussion. I had a small client 2 years ago. Some gentleman wanted to build a hunting app, and at first when I sat down with them and started talking about it, I was like, well, do we make it ad supported, or how do you guys want to pay for the development and the ongoing support um, of that? And what I came to realize was the most important thing that they had was their data. So this app would let record deer sightings and things of that nature, and then being able to actually take the data on the back end and anonymize it and be able to um, sell that to the ranchers who own the land, or to Department of Wildlife, or the various um, retailers or manufacturers of goods tailored towards hunting, became kind of the strong sales point. So monetization isn't always putting an ad, or charging some money through the app store to put it in a place. It's really the value of the data on the back end.
Okay, we got a couple more questions here. Um, do you recommend that agencies create
Mm-hmm.
two different apps for informational versus task-based functions, or one app that includes an all-you-can-eat in one app?
Okay, I hopefully understand the the question. A couple years ago, my now 10-year-old uh, was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and part of that process, and one of the heartaches and headaches of having at the time 8-year-old with it, is the communication process. So the doctor would give us instructions. We'd have to make sure that the nurse at the school had the instructions, and so on and so forth. So I built a mobile app to help us all coordinate all of those pieces, and it was very task oriented, right? It was utilitarian. Here's the 17 numbers we use in all of our calculations, and here's where we log all the information. Um, and I actually worked with a local hospital, in fact, the endocrinology group that my son goes with, and they wanted to add the educational side to it. Um, and as we talked through it, what really made sense for us was to be able to provide the informational uh, context, but make it in a way that the user could then hide it, or could get out of the way. So it's sort of like, lots of things will have like beginner mode or a tutorial. But then when you've completed that, then you don't have to go see that content again. So based on that, I would say put it all there, but make it where once a user has consumed the information, then it's easier to um, not see it, or to be able to move it out of the way. That's a really good question.
All right, two more. Is there a service bus layer, a separate piece of software that
Okay.
integrates the multiple data types? Did you get that?
There are several. Yes, yeah. So there are several that I can think of. Um, a lot of tools, like, for example, um, like MQ series, which is a data bus product, has these sort of data translation connectors that you would build for each of your applications that allow that um, to work. It's um, that might actually be a really great question to uh, talk with Fernando about, who's the practice lead for mobility here, on some of the other tools I may have used um, to accomplish that. Um, a few years ago, SOA, or service-oriented architecture, was really quite the buzzword. I don't know that I hear it quite as often, but I think the value of it is certainly still there. Um, you're basically building bridges between all of your connected devices. Good question. Thanks.
Okay, and the last one that came in, what are some good resources to creating policies for BYOD?
Oh gosh, we actually, I did a webinar last year related to this topic. Um, so I don't know specifically about resources. Like I don't know that I have a website to look at or to recommend. When I've done BYOD policy evaluations, it's really start with the policies that you already have um, for a laptop or desktop type of environment, and then evaluate how does that change to a mobile device and a employee-owned device. Do you need the ability to be able to remotely wipe their data? Do you need the ability to ensure that they can't email the data off of their device? Do you care if their device has been rooted or uh, jailbroken? Um, and you may find that you may not care about um, some of those things because your users already have access to that data anyway. So my recommendation is start with the policies that you have, and then evaluate those against the needs that of a user who isn't always working in front of their laptop or desktop system and has moved over to a mobile device. You want to support. You don't want to hinder their work um, functionality, but balance that with your needs to keep your own data safe and secure. Great question. I hope my answer was helpful.
Yeah, there was one more question real fast that I forgot to address. The question was, what are the most oppressive app developer companies in DC, Maryland, Virginia? Um, you know, you're from Texas, so I'm not sure if you're too familiar with the area, but I did want to point out that DICES does have a pretty extensive application services um, practice, and we are located in McLean, Virginia, and operate nationwide and globally in Brazil and India as well. So, we do have a pretty extensive practice around that. So really any other app developer companies would actually be competitors. So that is why I did delay on answering that question if you were wondering. But anyway, I think that's just about it. Unless you have any last input, Brian?
No. I think I've talked enough. Hopefully, the information was useful, and I just recommend if anyone has any further additional questions, you can contact Brian, and hopefully be able to help you out.
Yeah, thank you. I will be following up to all attendees with an email, including a recording of this, as well as just some follow-up information. So if you do want to reach out to us, if you have any other questions that you want to direct toward Brian or toward DICES in general, feel free to reach out. Again, thanks everyone for coming and taking your time. We hope that the information that we provided was adequate and that you guys enjoyed it. Thanks a lot. And thanks again, Brian.
You bet. My pleasure.